Good evening, everyone. This is International Master Oladapo Adu again, and I actually just played a game on the black side of a Sicilian Alpine, and it was an interesting game, and I thought I should just share the game. And while playing the game, something came to my mind. I went over a game that was played between, I think it was Edward Eguavon versus Yemi Festus recently, and a particular setup that happened in that game happened in my game. So that's the reason why I'm actually about to go over this game. Like I said, I played this game just a couple of minutes ago. So let's get right into it. White played e4. I played c5. White played c3. c3 is what we know as the Alapin variation of the Sicilian defense. It's a line played against the Sicilian defense. Now, what's the point of the Alapin variation? White is trying to establish a pawn center. What's the idea? White is trying to establish a pawn center. So white wants to just play d4, c takes d4, pawn c takes d4, and then he has these two pawns. He brings his knight to f3. The knight comes to c3, and white has a beautiful position. Why? Because he has control over the central squares. Now, it's interesting because just like in the game Yemi played, when the opponent played c3 to play d4, she hit on the pawn e4 with the move knight f6, which is actually one of the main lines played in this situation. Now, one of the reasons I'm really going over this game is because positions always reoccur. Positions are always coming up again and again and again. So if you get familiar with the positions you play in games, you'll be doing a very good favor for yourself. So, of course, in this position, I played d5, which is kind of similar to what Yemi played in our own line, although totally different Sicilian setup, but the same idea. In our game, she played knight f6 to put pressure on the pawn, forcing the opponent to play d3. So in my game, I'm playing d5, saying, you know what, I'm not going to let you get the d4 in. If you're going to get a d4 in, then you're going to have to deal with losing your pawn on e4. So after the move d5 captures back, knight f3. So white decides to just continue regular development, move the knight to f3. Now, one of the reasons why the d5 move is playable here is because after the e takes and queen takes d5, there is no knight to c3. We're always advised, don't bring your queen out early in the game. Yes, don't do that, because if you do, you're going to get in trouble. So the reason why I'm able to make this capture is because there's no knight c3. So after the move knight f3, I play knight f6. It's a very quick game. Knight f6, of course, developing my pieces. And now knight to a3. The idea of the knight is probably to move to b5 at some point, threaten the triple attack, my queen, my king, and my rook. So here I played a6, which is not the best move. Probably knight 6 would have been a good move. But I played a6 in this position, and then the move bishop c4 came. I say this all the time. You have to know your opening. Bishop c4, probably just the blitz move, because my queen is not really looking so good on d5, because there could be attacks on it, fine. But at the same time, bishop e2 c4 is not a move white wants to play in this position, because you're going to just give me the opportunity to move my queen back, move my pawn to e6, and get my pieces in the game. So after the move bishop to c4, queen d8 was played. d4. Now finally white plays d4, and interestingly, I can just capture on d4. It captures back, but now it doesn't have that knight on b1 that wants to jump to c3 that puts pressure on the d5 square. But one thing with me is I play pretty much based on principles. So why would I capture the pawn when I'm here to develop my other pieces? Why would I want to take the pawn and give my opponent some kind of tempo? So of course I played e6. The idea of e6 is, okay, if it captures the pawn on c5, I'm going to take the queen check. If king takes, I'm going to do bishop takes c5, and black is looking excellent, because there's the threat of bishop takes a3 messing up the pawn structure, and there's a threat of bishop takes f2 just winning a pawn. So after the move e6, my opponent played knight to c2, And interestingly, in the game, the same game Yemi played, Edward played against Yemi, rather. Knight c2 is a move that Edward actually played in his game. Like I said, it's interesting how this position kind of, looks similar, but it's going to get about to get a little hairy because there's another position we're going to see that looks exactly just like Yemi's position. So let's continue. After the move knight to c2, b5 was played. Of course, one thing about the Sicilian defense we always have to remember is when you play the Sicilian, it's always about play on the queen side. So if you can have a hold on the queen side, you're looking really good. I could have moved my bishop to e7 and then just castled. But after bishop e7, there's always the move a4 to stop my b5. Now, b5 is a multi-purpose move. Apart from the fact I'm attacking the bishop on c4, gaining a tempo on the bishop, I have an opportunity to move my bishop to b7, putting pressure on the long diagonal. And, black is just looking pretty good. So, of course, I played b5. Bishop goes back to e2. So here's the question. So when the bishop went to c4 in the first place, what's the point? See, that's the question. You can't just move pieces just because you want to move pieces. Every time you move a piece, there's got to be a reason, and there's got to be a good reason why you're moving to whatever square you want to move the piece to. So bishop e2, of course, I could have still played bishop to e7, just getting my pieces in the game. But, like a typical Sicilian player, I want to get my queen side going first. So I play bishop to b7, looking straight into white's territory. So after bishop to b7, it castles. I move my knight to d7. Like I said, like a typical Sicilian player, trying to get all the pieces on the queen side play first before continue with the black play on the side, on the king side. So knight b d7. Now, why did I move the knight b d7? Now, the idea of the knight b d7 is to try to fight for the e4 square. I know my opponent doesn't want to take on c5 because I have knight takes c5 and I have control over the e4 square. And if it doesn't take, I'm just going to bring my queen to c7, bishop d6, rook c8, castles, and black looks really good. So after the move knight b d7, it plays h3. If we remember the same game I'm talking about, h3 was played in the same game, Edward versus Yemi Festus. In this position, I really have no idea why h3 was played. To me, I think it's just a waste of move. Because, I have no plans going to g4 with my knight. Because it's not really going to threaten anything, right? So there was no point moving the pawn to h3. Instead, you want to try to get your pieces in the game as quick as possible. So after the move h3, I play bishop to e7. Now I'm about to castle, keep my king safe, and I already like the way my pieces are looking. Okay, bishop to e7, bishop to e3. The same move was played in this Edward Yemi game. Like I said, very eerie feeling looking at this, playing this game. The same move was played, and I know there was a time where there was a capture on, I think it was d5. Yeah, takes, and then bishop had to go back to d2. So after bishop to e3, rook c8. These are automatic moves for me. Why? Because you always want to take care of your queen side first. Do I have a better move? It's possible. Probably knight d5 is better, forcing the bishop back to a not so good square. And if the bishop refuses to move, knight takes is a good move. After f takes e3, black can boast of the two bishop, which can be very deadly for white in this position. White is going to have a lot of trouble with those bishops. So bishop e3, rook to c8. And remember, this is a blitz game. Normally I really don't like to play blitz. If you see me play blitz a lot online, probably I'm just trying to fight some maybe stress or something. So bishop to e3, rook to c8, and rook to c1. The same thing happened in the game Yemi, right? Edward Yemi, the same move. If you go back to the game, one of the videos I did, there was rook c1, there was bishop e3, there was h3, there was knight to c2, and at some point in time there was a rook e1 and there was a bishop f1. All this happened. So rook to c8, now black castles. And like I always say, always take stock. What do I mean by take stock? Check out all your minor pieces first. Of course, maybe your pawn structure, then you check out your minor pieces. What are your minor pieces doing? They're going to give you a very good idea of what you need to be doing. So if you look at black pieces are looking pretty good. You know, bishops are looking good. The knights looking good as well. What about white pieces? Well, this is not looking bad. This is all right. This is questionable. This is also very questionable. So, of course, rook on c1 is, you know, like I said, it's a question mark. So, rook e1, the same, like I said, the same, almost the same move played in that said game. Rook e1, queen to c7, another move that was played in the Edward Yemi game. Queen c7. These are typical Sicilian maneuvers. If your opponent doesn't do anything, you want to get your pieces on these squares. Why? Because when you get them to this particular squares, good things are going to happen. If you put your pieces on good squares, good things happen. If you put them on bad squares, bad things happen. Queen to c7 and bishop to g5, threatening nothing. I don't see any threat behind that. So I give the bishop a kick, like, you know, back off. After h6, it plays bishop to h4. Now I move my bishop to d6. What's the point of bishop to d6? Can we take a guess? Yes, I'm trying to move the pawn to g5. I'm trying to get rid of this bishop. I'm trying to either force him to capture back. I have the two bishops looking at the king's position. I'm going to say this again, please. I'm going to sound like a broken record. The same situation happened, almost similar, in the said Edward and Yemi's game. So after the move h6, it went back to h4. I move my bishop to d6. Now the threat is just g5. What's the point of g5? I'm going to win a pawn. Bishop g3, bishop takes, f takes, queen takes g3, and black is looking excellent. So after the move h6, queen bishop d6, sorry, it plays knight to e3. Finally, the knight on c2 is trying to get in the game, you know, trying to get some action. I really don't know where the knight is going. Let's see. Does he have the g4 square? That wouldn't make much sense because he's just going to get your pawns doubled. Doesn't really give you anything. Can he knight go to f5? Not at all. What about d5? No. What about c4? No. What about c2? Well, that's where it came from. What about f1? Well, not really doing much on f1. This is how you know when your pieces are doing something right or when they're not. Like I said, the threat of bishop d6 was to play g5. If we remember this game that was played, yes, you already know. Edward versus Yemi. Bishop d6 was played in that position. She actually had the battery here. And of course, I played g5, just threatening to win a pawn. And this is where my opponent went crazy. You know, I mean, bishop g3, bishop takes, bishop g3, bishop takes on g3, f takes on g3, queen takes g3. I'm a pawn up, and of course I have a better position. Like I said, my opponent went crazy here, and it did takes on c5. Now this is the idea. Bishop takes will be bad because then it gets a tempo on my queen, and now all of a sudden, you know, things are not looking so good for me like I expect, even though I still favor my position. But when you have a chance of making the best move, go ahead and make the best move. Don't wait for just any kind of move. Of course, I capture off the knight, and this is another thing. By capture of the knight, I'm improving the placement of my pieces. So my knight that was on d7 is now all of a sudden on c5, and it has some really targets on the black position, on the white position. So after knight takes c5, this, like I said, this is where my opponent had to go crazy. It took my took on g5. I take back. It takes with the bishop. Now the idea is, well, you know, I'm about to, instead of losing a pawn, I think I'm just going to give up a piece, open up the king's position, and try to make something happen. But this is the bad news. Even though my king's position is pretty open right now, your bishop alone is in no position to mate this king. You need this queen right here. And I don't see how this queen can join in the party anytime soon. I don't see that happen. So, and the interesting thing is, black still has all this pressure on the king's position. So bishop takes g5, knight c to e4. Now that was not the best move according to the engine, but you have to remember this was a 3-minute game. The best move was actually knight f to e4. But hey, still have an advantage anyway. So I played knight c to e4, and one of the reasons I really didn't move the knight, I never thought about moving the f knight. Like I said, I play pretty much based on principles. The knight defends my king's position. So if you have a chance of moving a knight to create some kind of play, I would prefer to move a knight that is not really close to my king, because I might need this knight to defend my king. So after the move knight e4, my opponent played bishop h6, gaining a tempo on my rook. Well, guess what? I got my tempo right back. Rook, I played in this position, I played rook f to d8. And another, the same pattern happened in the same Yemi's game. Although in that situation, in that game, it was on the e file, where the rook was right in front of the queen in an x-ray format. Of course, after rook f to d8, bishop d3 was played. What's the point of bishop d3? Blocking the d file temporarily, but still doesn't really work. And of course, with some of the principles that I've learned in the Kan Sicilian, my plan was actually just to go to f4, exchange the pieces, queen takes, and then I have pressure here. But if I take here now, it's just going to be a check. King can just step in. So what do? Bishop h2 check. The same thing happened in the said Yemi's game. If the king goes to h1, it is knight takes f2, lights out. So the king has to come to f1. In the said Yemi game, sorry, I'm sounding as if like I said, like a broken record, but in the said game, the king was the only piece defending the f2 square. The queen was actually trying to defend it at some point. Of course, you will know what happened to the queen. The queen got captured. So after the checking goes to f2, now the move rook, bishop f4. Not the best move, but it's good enough. After the move bishop to f4, bishop takes, queen takes, threatening, checkmate. Now that's the difference between going to f4 immediately and checking on h2 to bring the king to f1, so that when the capture happens on f4, it's a mate threat on f2. Of course, rook c2 was played, stopping the checkmate temporarily. And now I could have just rook c7 and just doubled on the d file with just very nasty threats. But instead I made a move which is not so good, but still good enough to win the game. I moved the knight back to c5. What's the threat? Trying to win a piece. So he moves the rook to d2, threatening to defend the bishop on d3. Now I wasn't liking any of these funny threats of check. I always say this, when there's a possible threat on your pieces, try to do something about it. Don't wait till when it's too late. So I just stepped up. Another move I could have played was just rook d7 and then double the rooks. But of course, like I said, it's a 3-minute game. I like to just play pretty much on principles. When I see a threat, I try to stop it so that my opponent doesn't even have an idea of maybe that ever happening at any point. So king g7 was played, and now bishop went to c2. Not a good move, but the question is, what exactly would be a good move in this position? Not a whole lot. And I hit him with the move knight to e4 again. So the threat pretty much is, I want to take on f2, I want to take on d2. So how does white respond to this? Nothing good inside. For example, if your bishop takes, knight takes, still threatening the mate here, threatening the rook and threatening f2. So what does it do? If the rook moves away, it loses the queen. Queen is lost. If the rook takes, I don't have to take back, and it's not a check. Thank God my king is no longer on g8, but now it's on g7. I simply take on f2, and that's a checkmate. Like I said, I really just wanted to go over this game real quickly. I was really just excited because I'm like, wow, I went over a game maybe 3-4 days ago. I did a video about Edward versus Yemi, the Richard Asibo Memorial. And now there's almost the same position happened in my game. All right, people, thanks for viewing. And check the game out. Let me know what you think. And see you soon, like very, very soon. All right, take care and have a wonderful week. Bye.